Hey y'all, take a good look at this picture. How is it possible to eliminate this enemy without taking any damage? Well, welcome to Bullet Hell. Archvale is an intense 2D action RPG where you fight against the evil forces of the Undying Guardians. Maybe you think this is another clone of Zelda, A Link to the Past, but is it really? What is unique and potentially innovative in this game? In this review, I discuss the basic aspects of the game and whether it is worth buying. The story is about the main character's hunt for 7 large stones. The stones have been spread all over the world and the goal is to find these and create a portal to another world. On the way you meet NPCs who describe the world you're in and give a picture of what happened. The game does not contain many cutscenes, but has a more text-based approach to explain things. I think it works quite well, but it feels like the game story is of secondary importance, while other aspects are in focus, such as lots of action. But if you want to immerse yourself in previous events, there is the opportunity to talk to different townspeople and listen to certain characters who play a vital role in the story. Archvale is a 2D game that uses a top-down perspective. In the game you visit cities to buy items and weapons, make upgrades to crafting, deposit money in the bank or enlist the help of a chef to gain access to more health. You then use your weapons to fight hordes of different enemies. The battles are an essential part of this game, so most of the time you will be in a fight. The game is divided into different regions, and if you take a look at the map, you will see that the large squares are cities, the small squares are battle zones, and marked out there are also points of interest and dungeons. I really like the map. It's exemplary designed and easy to follow. It explains in a guiding way where you can go and where you haven't been yet. In this way you get an indication of what you should do next, and you don't have to run around blindly. Most of the game takes place out in the wild. There you are exposed to constant attacks of various enemies, but part of the game also takes place in dungeons. Here it's quite clear that the game developers have been inspired by the early Legend of Zelda games. To open doors you must find keys or press switches to open new paths. You may also come across simpler puzzles that contributes to the game's variety. Each dungeon also has its own final boss, and yes, it's very similar to Legend of Zelda. However, the dungeons are quite short, and if you have a good flow in your playing, it shouldn't take long before you finish. As a whole, the game is relatively varied, but I think the dungeons make the game more dynamic. It can be monotonous if you stay too long in the wild. There are not much going on than slaughtering monsters. Therefore, the dungeons are the highlight of the game. It becomes fun and more interesting. This is a game with pixel art graphics. Animations, characters, objects and buildings generally look good, but it's a simple design, a flat foundation with objects and buildings. However, some environments look more spectacular than others, like this city for example. I think the city and the water merge in a natural way. One problem is that everything is so small. There's no possibility to adjust the camera, which means that you have to strain your eyes. This becomes quite stressful in the long run, given the structure and scope of the game. Sure, it's a good experience to run around in pixelated environments, but since everything is so small, you can get tired after a while. I had to rest my eyes a couple of times to be able to continue playing. But the game has different environments, everything from winter worlds, desert landscapes, forests, and mountain environments. I think the developers have succeeded well in creating a varied world. It also makes it easy to orientate oneself. You know where you are, and if you cross over to a new area with a different kind of environment, you can assume that you've gone the wrong way. A problem that arose on several occasions was that the game crashed. During my playthrough, the game stopped working at least 5 times. Some crashes were more frustrating than others, and it all depends on when I last saved. The opportunity to save is at the statues scattered throughout the game. It gets very frustrating to have to reduce certain parts or get interrupted due to the game crashing, but of all the games I've ever played on the Nintendo Switch, Archvale is by far the top in terms of crashes. I've never seen anything like it, that a game crashes so frequently. The game contains lots of weapons and armor. The weapons work in different ways and have both strengths and weaknesses. You can use melee weapons, ranged weapons and magic weapons. The large selection is an important reason why the game is entertaining. It's fun to test how the different weapons work and see which ones are the best for you. It's also possible to upgrade a weapon. By paying a townsperson, he makes your weapon stronger, which may prove necessary in the long run, as some enemies may have a large health pool. Sometimes you find weapons in chests, or you create your own. Whatever you do, it's fun to see your character get stronger, that the enemies take more damage and become easier to eliminate. The enemies you encounter are everything from slimes to various insects, animals and humanoids. But when you play, you hardly have time to observe what they look like, because you're fully occupied with avoiding thousands of arrows and fireballs. It's as if the game is trying to drain one of the joys of life. In principle, all fights are about avoiding injury. Imagine that you meet 5 enemies at the same time, and they all shoot out 2 torpedoes per second. This corresponds to 100 projectiles in 10 seconds. And this is how the game is. A madness, an ongoing war between the protagonist and a sea of ammunition. Unfortunately, I think it's a bit monotonous and annoying in the long run. It's as if the enemies have only one mechanic, to be able to shoot as much as possible. I wish there was a little more variety, something that makes one think about how the enemy works. After a while, you also realize that it's practically impossible not to be hit. Therefore, one must change one's tactics and understand that one's health pool is important for survival. Collecting as many hearts as possible in combination with strong health potions will be central to survival, especially in the later stages of the game when the enemy does more damage. Eliminate your enemies before you die yourself. A similar tactic applies to the game's bosses. They have an abundance of attacks that are difficult to avoid. Therefore, the easiest way is to just zerg down the bosses, ignore their mechanics and make sure they die as quickly as possible. Since you're constantly exposed to bullets, a good control is important for the game to work. Here I think the game developers have succeeded well. It's smooth to move in all directions and easy to use your dash ability to handle tricky situations. However, using certain weapons can be a bit challenging. I noticed that it could be difficult to aim and hit, especially with a laser beam. I guess this is a part of the game's challenge, to be able to master all the weapons, but the control generally works well. I like it. Without any doubt, Archvale is a crazy experience. I never think I've played a game before that contains so much action. As soon as you are in battle, you're exposed to overwhelming attacks. This is also part of the game's strengths. So much happens that you have to concentrate, otherwise you risk dying. However, it can be a bit monotonous in the long run. The enemies usually only have their bullet rain available and not much else. You get used to it in the long run. Dungeons are usually entertaining. They are a little more varied and are fun to get through. The experience is also almost completely free from slowdowns. It flows well, at least on the Nintendo Switch. There is a certain replayability in the game, mostly considering the different levels of difficulty. As far as I know, you cannot change difficulty during the game. It can only be set when you start a new game. Therefore, one can work oneself upwards, from easy to normal, and finish with hardcore. It's also possible to play co-op, but not online. I think Archvale is a nice action RPG, and I recommend a purchase if you like to tackle hordes of enemies and see explosions on the screen, but it can get a little monotonous in the long run. Please subscribe to my channel so you do not miss upcoming reviews and other content. Have a nice day, take care, bye.